Welcome to the Big 12 Sports Psychologists Roundtable. This is the third edition we've done that, or have the privilege to do it. This was born out of the idea of putting out really pertinent, meaningful topics to our student athletes and workers across the athletic department, and providing some insight and support around these topics. And so I'm privileged. My name is Marty Martinez. I'm the psychologist, the sports psychologist and director of our sports psychology services here at Iowa State University, and have the honor of moderating a panel of distinguished sports psychologists, counselors across the Big 12. Today we are going to be talking about home for the holidays, and other issues pertinent during this time of the semester break for many of our campuses. So I'd like our distinguished panel to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Monique Marshbell, and I serve as the Assistant Athletic Director for Mental Health Services at Baylor University.
I'm Dr. Annie Weiss. I'm the Director of Mental Wellness and Sports Psychology for K-State Athletics.
JJ Swearingen, Assistant Director at Psychological Resources for OU Student Athletes, fourth year.
Hello, I'm Dr. Trevor Richardson. I'm the Director of Counseling and Sports Psychology at Oklahoma State University.
I'm Dr. Matt Johnson, Sports Psychology Consultant and Licensed Professional Counselor, Texas Christian University.
And I'm Dr. Dana Charbonneau. I'm our Director of Clinical and Sports Psychology at West Virginia University.
Thank you all. Thank you all for doing that. It's an honor for us to represent our universities, to represent the Big 12 conference, and our colleagues who are not joining us, not able to join us today, as we kind of hold it to a smaller group each roundtable. As I mentioned, the topic today that we start with is home for the holidays. And we know this is a time during this break that many student athletes do go home, as well as many student athletes, some will stay on campus for a variety of reasons, for sport reasons, for personal reasons, financial reasons. And I want to throw out to the panel what have been and are your experiences with this holiday semester break time for your student athletes?
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out to me is conversations I've had with international student athletes that I've been working with, and they're late October, early November, there were uncertainties about whether they'd be able to return home over the winter break. We have a 2-month break. So all our student athletes, all of our students were finished right before Thanksgiving. And so we are off for 2 months. And so there's uncertainty about whether they'd be able to return. And most of them had a good sense that they probably would not be able to go back home. And that was helpful to know earlier rather than later, so they could kind of be more mentally prepared. So we had a chance to kind of process what that was going to be like, and then problem solve about what they wanted to do during their time. One of the benefits they talked about is just being able to have other international student athletes who are also not going to be able to go home. And actually, we've talked about doing some activities for them, scheduled this week and the next couple weeks, as it's December 2nd today, and some meditation practice, and also we designed something called the Mental Health Olympics, hopefully to get them some information and also some fun activities, so they can enjoy their time here, but also learn some information about mental health and implement some strategies.
What I've noticed pretty similar to the reactions of my athletes throughout this entire process. Is it's been varied. The responses and perceptions are very varied. Some are very excited to go home, relieved at the break, a chance for a 2-month rest. Others are a little more uncertain about how do they maintain their fitness over the long break on their own. They feel kind of protected in their bubbles here, and they're unsure of how to set those boundaries with family and friends who want to be around them, and they want to stay safe to come back home. So like we've been seeing since March, the reactions are across the board.
I know that there's some athletes that I've worked with that are very hesitant going home because they're going back home to maybe environments that are not as positive and nurturing, and they're worried that there's a possibility they could get into trouble or be around their friends that tend to get into trouble. So just working with them on positive coping skills and decision making. The decision-making process is kind of utmost importance at this time right now before they head home.
Similar to what Annie was mentioning as well, that variety of experiences stand out to me also just with differences amongst teams and how long their breaks are. I know some of our teams are coming back like right after Christmas, and some of them aren't coming back till like mid-January, closer to when the semester starts again. So that also adds to how much of that break they'll truly have, or if they will have that extended break, then maybe more of those training concerns come into place of like having access to facilities and things like that. But that's just been interesting to navigate with them as well, the differences amongst the teams and what's that going to look like. And also differences if you're in season or out of season. And if you're in season coming back in the spring, if you're going to feel more of that increased pressure to be at a certain place when you get back versus maybe you're coming off of volleyball season, for example, and you just want a little bit of a break right now because you just finished up your season. So I think that's also just interesting for us to consider where all of our athletes are at.
I hear a lot of things that have already been said today, so I won't repeat those. Just a couple other aspects that I've noticed are, one, financial. Some of the student athletes who maybe get stipends, things like that, and then they're going home and they're not going to get that. Then they go back and forth on, can I get a job in this short amount of time or not? And after working through compliance, all that type of stuff. So financial issues play into it as well. And then, so the structure, that's something that when, for a lot of them, it might get old having, okay, I got practice and workouts and class and this, that, but everything's scheduled. And then when I go to no structure at all, then all of a sudden I start under functioning. And that echoes some of what we've talked about in this group with the whole pandemic shutdown, go back after spring break and that lack of structure. And so that's going to be a recurring theme for some of the student athletes that I'm working with.
I think about what JJ was saying about the environment. And so I know with some of the student athletes I've been talking to, the kind of restriction around traveling. So they have these 2 months, they want to go home, but they don't want to be there that whole 2 months. And it's like, if I go home, I can't just stay for a week and turn around and come back. I have to be tested, and just thinking about the traveling. And so I know that's been a difficult piece that they're trying to navigate too, is if they're going to go home, how long can they realistically stay for their mental health before they would want to or need to come back, and then what that transition back would look like.
And another interesting piece for international students, there was a lot of concern with our athletes of, can I get home? But then there was the follow-up piece of, will I be able to come back if I go home? And that riskiness of that decision weighed heavy on their minds.
Yeah, thank you for those multiple. We do know, when we were undergrads, it was pretty simple for many of us. Just, we're going to go home for the holidays. And for student athletes, the real complexity of what that means, and freeing up schedule, finances, family issues. So thank you for addressing many of those. One that came to mind too is always this interesting one, like for example, around food, right? So Thanksgiving is always this interesting time. In my work, say with the wrestlers, it's in season, it's the beginning of the season. And so they're staying here and looking forward to that Thanksgiving break. And yet it's this complexity of enjoying that holiday and be invited to coaches or homes. And yet the issue of what are they going to eat? How are they going to eat? What are they going to do with that potential, what they might fear, weight gain? And so I'm wondering what that's been like for you as providers in dealing with and working with athletes, where holidays also bring this impact of things getting off schedule, irregular eating, or what can bring about sometimes disordered thinking about food and eating. What's your experiences with those, with student athletes during this time?
I know with some of the wrestlers that I've worked with, food's constantly on their mind. It doesn't matter if it's Thanksgiving or not. Once they hit season, they have to drop weight. But it's just trying to put them in situations to where they're not the most tempted. Maybe not going to this person's house, or maybe all of the wrestlers getting together and having a Thanksgiving meal, a healthy meal, so that they're not all just tempted, things like that.
This is where I also love being able to work within a department where we have multiple folks from other areas working together and collaborating. So I very much appreciate our sports dietitians, and I work very closely with our one with Olympic sports as well. So I think it's awesome to be able to tag team these conversations with our athletes before they head home, whether it's on a collaborative programming call for them or in individual meetings where it's, maybe some of them are processing some of the emotional part with me. And like JJ said, we're preparing for having certain supports in place or certain ways that you might cope or manage with certain things. And then with our sports dietitian, they're also able to talk through any of those fears or concerns about how fueling their body might look different, and maybe myth busting a little bit in terms of some of those fears and worries. So I always think that's really helpful to let them use the resources before they go home, so that they have more of a plan in place for how they might tackle some of that and how they can communicate their needs when they're home with family as well.
I think it's interesting, again, that there's so many different ways that our athletes respond to going home for the holidays around food. There's some that they're going to be able to let their guard down a little bit because they're not with their teammates. They're not comparing themselves. They're not worried about making weight or being in a certain shape in that moment, and they feel a little freer. And then there's some that are going to go home and really worry about if, I actually have a full Thanksgiving meal or a full Christmas meal, or if I'm not working out as much, what I'm going to look like and what kind of shape I'm going to be in when I come back. And so we're trying to help people in very different places navigate and be able to care for themselves over the break. And one of the nice things about this longer break is that it allows some of our athletes to have the opportunity to do some more intensive care if they need that. And because a lot of things are virtual now, we're doing a lot of VIOP services for a lot of different things. And so that's kind of nice that they're able to have that longer break to really work hard on their mental health and their recovery in that area and come back maybe in a better place. But I think from a mental health provider perspective, sometimes it's hard because you have athletes in all these different categories and you're trying to help them manage it in very different ways when they head home for the holidays.
Yeah, and I would add varying levels of training, overtraining, undertraining, and how that relationship works with food. And then you have schedule disruptions. So is their sleep going to get off? And will that impact their appetite or their energy levels? And I mean, it's really delicate intersection of all these dynamics happening. And so it's difficult as a provider you can't just put a blanket plan on all of them. You have to really know your athletes and work as a team, like Dana mentioned, to help each of them feel prepared for the long break.
Yeah,
and I think when we're fortunate enough to get coaches on board on those teams, that makes such a huge difference when we can do that proactive education with them, and when they can reinforce those same messages that the sports dietitians and the athletic trainers and people from Sports Meta are providing, that that goes a long way. So I can't say how much I appreciate when we get great coaches on board too.
Yeah, and I think just helping them identify stress triggers, not just stress triggers if they're still here on campus, but ones going home, especially emotionally powerful triggers that may be in that environment. Something they haven't had to think about for several months
yes, so many regular during this time of the year, but also so many new triggers. And you've all mentioned so many different overlaying factors and intersections at this time that can bring up new triggers, as well as give us an opportunity to also guide them back to their ongoing strengths that they have available for them, no matter what the triggers are. One of the factors also going on now is where they're at in the season, which makes a big difference as to their enjoyment of going home and maybe eating. Some are finishing up and maybe experiencing a kind of post-season letdown right now. The buildup of would we have a season, and they did have a season, whether it's football, whether it's soccer, volleyball, cross country. Some are kind of starting up or mid, and swimming. Some of my swimmers are doing virtual swim meets, and they're wondering, will they ever really compete again when they come back? Others will be starting again, starting up in the new semester and wondering what that would be like. And how has that been experienced by you? This kind of where the athletes are in their season, post, mid, prep, and how you've seen any kind of impact of that during this COVID time.
I think for me, the biggest thing with all my sports is a certain level of uncertainty and, just a constant fear that their season is going to be canceled. How are we going to deal with a shortened season? How are we going to do hotels or bus rides or, competitions? There's a lot of fear and then that, they're not going to have a season and all this work's going to be for nothing. That kind of seems to be the consensus with kind of what I'm dealing with.
Yeah, I would say similar to what JJ said, it could be all of a sudden there's a swim meet on the schedule for next week and it wasn't on the schedule before. So, just psychologically, are they ready to compete? Are they worried about competing, based on where they're at and their training? And if they've been injured too, I'm thinking of, athlete who's been injured and now, they hadn't been expecting to swim, but then the coach maybe like, okay, well, let's see how it goes. And so they're like, oh, well, I wasn't expecting to swim next week. So just helping them kind of prepare for those uncertainties.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear where some of our athletes are at who are anticipating spring season and some of those uncertainties and worries that are coming up, and just remembering what that was like for some of our fall sport athletes at the same time. And now hearing their perspective when those seasons are finished is interesting for me, where it's kind of like it was shorter, but we got it in and it actually went maybe better than we anticipated, where we didn't have to take a lot of time off, or there weren't as many interruptions as we were anticipating. But also just in the present moment, with what we are noticing is happening a little bit with football and basketball as it's starting, there do seem to be a little bit more stop and starting that's happening a little bit more recently. So again, just staying in the present moment and just as things unfold is just this ongoing theme for the year, with us having to adjust and adapt as best as possible. But I am glad for some of our fall sport athletes that some of them are walking away from those seasons feeling pretty grateful for what they did get in.
Yeah, I don't know if our fall sports have helped the mental health of our spring sports, because our fall athletes kind of didn't know what to expect and were taking everything day by day, and it was really up and down. And now that our spring sports have seen what our fall sports have gone through, I don't know if it's helped them feel like, okay, it's going to be a little rocky, but I can do it, like they're making it through, or has it made them a little more anxious about the uncertainty, but knowing that it's going to be a rocky season. So it's been interesting to hear those conversations between spring and fall sports as some are starting and some are ending, what their concerns are, and giving advice to each other about that.
Yeah, I think some of those conversations I've had with student athletes in the fall sports has helped the conversations with the upcoming seasons, as far as I can reflect that, okay, here's what I've seen in some of the student athletes that have coped with it better. And one thing that I've noticed is, and we've got into what if versus what is discussion with a lot of my student athletes. And when they go down the rabbit hole of what if, we have to bring it back to, like they always hear from coaches, control the controllables, and say, okay, you can keep asking what if, but those aren't going to be answered right now. Let's ask what is, and let's deal with that. And then oftentimes that brings them into the here and now, and they tend to be a little bit more successful. And then that idea of that structure of, okay, I'm going to be training hard, and I don't know for sure that I'm going to compete. So I go back to good old Viktor Frankl and that idea of, finding meaning in that struggle along the way. And can you find some meaning regardless of if you get to compete or not in what you're doing right now as far as your training? And again, the ones that have been able to say yes and find that meaning are the ones that I've seen that be more successful.
Trevor, you started to hit on a kind of a possible next question, and that is what we've kind of experienced, what we've learned as professionals and as people during these past 9 months in working with our student athletes, working with our administration, our colleagues, working with health professionals. So much going on. That's one of the big, be aware of what we don't control and control the controllables. And sometimes that's pushed us personally to the limit as we're trying to teach that and mentor that to others. And I'm wondering for you, what that's been, what's something that maybe has been the most difficult or challenging thing you've experienced, both as a professional and or personally, as well as something that you've deepened in and know that you will take that forward with you in your work, in your life.
One of the things that I just hope we're all aware of, and I don't know if it's happened to any of you guys, but I've had several athletes that have been a contact multiple times up to where they're in quarantine for 20 or 30 days in a row. And I really worry about the psychological impact that it has short-term and long-term. But the problem sometimes is sometimes we don't get the roster of people that have been in for 20 or 30 days until after it's over. And they're like, well, that person, was in 20 or 30 days, and just making sure that we have the awareness that we need, that if somebody's going to be in there for the long haul, that we have the ability to check in on them and it not kind of fall through the cracks with something that, once it hits 20 days or something, I've just noticed that people start to get really down,
JJ, I've seen that magnified with our first semester student athletes, the ones that have transferred in, or freshmen who haven't really had the same amount of time to make those connections with teammates and with friends across campus. And I've seen their feelings of isolation really magnified.
So let me ask you guys, are the athletes informed, like that they can reach out to you all, or do you all reach out to them? I mean, what's kind of like the protocol that you guys have in place? I mean, I know for us, often team physicians, if they know, or sometimes athletic trainers, at least at the beginning, I think, of the semester, it was like, okay, if this person's in quarantine, they inform the athlete, hey, you can reach out to the counseling center. Here's the number. I don't know how many they shared that with, and I don't know actually if that continued throughout the semester. So I'm curious. I know there were some that they said, yeah, we gave them the information, but they never reached out. I'm curious how it worked for you all at your schools.
So we reach out to every student athlete that is positive or close contact, and we try to reach out to them at least twice during that 10 to 14 day window. Some of our, what JJ's referring to, people that have been in 20, 30 days, we've called them our frequent flyers. And for some of them, especially if we know that they've been struggling, we've been trying to put together little mental health care packages and deliver them safely to their door, and then back up 6 feet. And as they open, just share with them that we're there for them, and maybe have a quick conversation before we leave. It's been more difficult to be consistent with that part throughout the semester as things have picked up. But thinking about that in conjunction with the question that Marty asked about like being, what we've learned is I know that a lot of our student athletes are grateful in ways that maybe they haven't been before about the ability to practice and the ability to compete, the ability to see their families. I know being in Texas, we have a lot of Texas students, and so families that have been able to come to the competition and see, you know, their family during that time, even if it's socially distant, just knowing that mom and dad are in the stands has been something that I can tell that they're not going to take for granted moving forward. Even thinking about the break, like finally getting to go spend time with family for a lot of them they haven't seen since August, June, July, depending on what sport. They're definitely something that they've learned is how grateful they should be. I've even had some funny conversations about like 5 a.m. practices or 5 a.m. workouts. But once you get out of quarantine and you haven't been able to go anywhere for 2 weeks, you are actually cool with that 5 a.m. or at least for a while. And I think the same for me, just thinking about the holidays and being able to go spend some time with family because I don't have to worry about coming back and, you know, being in a space with our student athletes and able to protect the team because we won't be together for a little bit. So I think that's definitely something that I've seen, this just gratefulness.
And I think I just wanted to follow up on my answers. You know, we do send out every time we find out from the trainers, we send out a, hey, call me if you need anything type thing. The only problem is that goes to the person that's in charge of that team. And sometimes if I'm working with a player that's on somebody else's team, I may not know that this person's on that list. You know, so that's kind of the issue that we just struggled with. I wish there was something to where, I don't know, I guess it was just a little bit more, there was a format to it kind of, so.
Well, I think all of us are also just speaking to that importance and remembering with the gratitude, the connection part too, right? Like if you are quarantining for an extended period of time and you're isolated on your own, or like we're saying, just doing things virtually now and training in pods or whatever it is for us working from home. I mean, for me and our athletes, I think just that importance of connection has been highlighted. And what will that look like if we ever get back to a sense of normalcy, and being grateful for that. As an international employee as well, I haven't been able to go home to Canada with the border being closed. And so I am making an effort to do that this holiday. I'll have to quarantine for 2 weeks, but it's the only time I can really do that. And so, yeah, having that appreciation when things that you used to be able to do more freely, you can't do now. And just thinking for ourselves, like how we will communicate more with our colleagues when we can walk to each other's office easily again at some point in the future versus, you know, being in the office or out of the office or whatever it's looked like for all of us. But just that connection piece has been really important for me to remember, and for our athletes.
And we don't have a really great system in place about getting the information about close contacts or positive cases. And that's going to be a priority of mine to start the next semester, of how can we do better with that and how can that information be shared. But to answer your question, Marty, it's been hard not to be around family like normally, like Dana's saying. Also, though, the quiet and the lack of pressure to do a lot of family stuff has been nice also. I hope my mom's not watching this. And professionally, it's hard to set those boundaries to help protect yourself when clients are saying, I'll just wait until you can see people in person again. And then feeling that pull to move the chairs and wear the masks and you know, just personally and professionally thinking, what is my duty here? How can I make this safe for all of us while also providing the care? I don't want them to just wait for months and months without being seen. So that's been kind of a tricky place for me to be the past couple months as well.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I appreciated actually asking that question, because I'm always interested in how you're doing individually too, how we're doing as helpers. So thank you. I think we have time for one more question for you all. We have been spending time as a group thinking about and preparing for a mental health awareness week, and we've done that. Many of us have done it in some different ways, smaller ways, much more formal ways, which has been very impressive. And our discussion about doing that in 2021 for the winter, for the fall. So with just that in mind, I'll just kind of put it out. What, as we're thinking about mental health awareness, what would be that something that you would most want your student athletes to hear in regards to their mental health? Yeah, what would you like them to really hear?
To me, one of the most important things they can hear is there's strength in vulnerability. The idea of, all of our student athletes, strength is important to whatever sport they're in. And just when we're breaking through that stigma, I think that idea of, actually being vulnerable, that's a great form of leadership. That's a great form of strength. And I hope that they can, they've had that message delivered to them before, but I hope they can continue to hear that and live by it.
Yeah, for me, it would be about remembering their adaptability. When they first came to their college, they had to adapt. A lot of changes going on: new teammates, new coaches, new institution, new academic challenges, and where they're at now, they've had to adapt and develop strategies to make it through that and to excel. And just with COVID, I mean, it's this, in a different capacity, but still being able to adapt. And they're, not doing it alone. They have a lot of resources available. And, we're halfway through the academic year at this point. And so, to focus on their strengths that they've learned along the way.
I guess just to add to that emotional vulnerability and wellness piece, especially during COVID, it's okay to not be okay all the time. And just to remember that we are living through a pandemic right now, and this is realistically challenging and not super easy for us. And so again, just reminding our athletes that it can not be the greatest at the same time. And just like Matt said, we can also be putting things in place to kind of help us get through it as best as we can right now, but to acknowledge that it's okay if it doesn't feel okay all the time is something I'd want to pass along.
Yeah, I think there's, we talk about stigma with mental health. I think part of the stigma is this belief that every athlete suffers daily and it's hard, and all athletes are having a hard time and all athletes are in pain every day. And I would want to challenge that no, it's not all athletes are suffering every day. And if you're suffering, it is okay. And that people are here that love you for more than what you could produce on a field or in the arena or on the court, and that there are services available.
I would say, thinking about our holidays theme, that a lot of times people feel like the holidays are like the best time and it's the happiest time and you should be happy and you should be enjoying family, and there are all these like shoulds around the holidays, and that's not everyone's story. And so I feel like I've had this conversation with athletes about like their decision not to go home and feeling guilty about that. But, families look very different for people. Holidays look very different for people. And like Dana said, we got a pandemic on top of that. And so just to validate and normalize the fact that you might be in a different place than your teammate when it comes to how you feel about going home for the holidays, or what your memories are from past holidays. Some of that stuff is really difficult for our athletes to think about, and that's okay. And that there are services still available in one shape or form, and don't feel like you should be ashamed to reach out for help if you're having difficulties with the holidays or with interactions with family, because society makes us think that those things should be happy and wonderful and we should all be singing Christmas carols, because that's not everyone's experience.
Yeah, along with what Monique said, I can think of a couple athletes who talked about not shitting on yourself during this holiday break.
I agree with Monique. I don't think I could have said it better in any way, shape, or form. I think she said it wonderfully.
as I unmute myself, thank you for those sometimes on the fly, but yet thoughts and reflections. And yet, as many of you were talking, these are things that are near and dear to us, have been so all along for us in our work. Maybe are reasons why we went into the work we were doing, because of that innate belief in our both strengths of adaptability, vulnerability, and just great abilities to do more than we thought we could for ourselves and for others. So thank you. I was honored to moderate. Appreciated your thoughtfulness, and encourage again that mental health awareness for our student athletes to utilize people who care personally, and also care with an experience of tapping into some wisdom, not just giving you wisdom, but allowing you to tap into your own. And that's what I appreciate about our Big 12 colleagues' ability and desire to do that for and with you. So thank you. Monique, thank you for the editing you'll be doing for this. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity. And we all wish you happy holidays, happy break, happy seasons behind and ahead of you, and wish you well.
Thank you.
Thank you.